Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the next episode of Stream Time Sports. My name is Chris Stone, the community lead, joined as always by our CEO Nick Meacham. Now, Nick, I'm going to have a little bit of a moan about social media platforms, and I don't know why. It just seems more common these days, but something recently has come up, primarily with, I would say, Twitter and LinkedIn are the worst at it, is when I've got a tab open or I exit the app on my phone, and then I come back in, and I see a post at the top that looks really intriguing, and then it goes and auto refreshes, and then I can never find that post again. I don't remember it always being that common, but it's happened more and more. Or, for example, like LinkedIn, I click on a post and I want to go back and I want it to take me in my timeline to where I was when I clicked out, but then it takes me to a whole new one. And I don't know what it is, Nick. I feel like some of this auto refresh stuff has been happening a bit more frequently to me, and it's a little bit annoying. I want to come back exactly where I was.
Do you know why that happens?
Tell me, Nick.
I'm going to guess it's because it means you count as more views and impressions by seeing more stuff. So if you auto refresh, you therefore they see more things on your page versus going back to the same slides. It's a simple numbers game, I believe. That's my theory anyway.
It could be. You're probably right, Nick, but that doesn't mean I enjoy it. Like, seriously, every time I like click on Twitter, and I know it's X now, whatever, like old habits, but like literally every time I click on, ooh, that's a really interesting post, and then bam, auto refresh before I've even had a chance to read, and then I never find the post again. I find it's happening more and more these days, and it's grinding my gears a little bit.
Well, you just need to follow through and actually watch and consume whatever you want at the time, and then move on with your day rather than need to come back to it. But I do agree. I've had that experience before. I'm like, oh, now I want to find that thing that I was going to look at, and it's disappeared. Although I've actually accounted to that, and the other, not a counter, but a contrasting gripe or issue with those same sort of social platforms is a couple of times I'm on Instagram or an X, and it's serving me just utter crap. Let's just be blunt. And so I leave the page because I'm like, oh, I can't. Why am I on X again? This is ridiculous. This stuff's just getting worse and worse. And the problem is when I open that stuff, or if you're on your phone and you're closing down the apps, when you like slide, you have to go close. It depends on what type of phone you have, but you sort of open up you can see, you toggle through the different apps to close them. The last screenshot you have is of the really bad or crappy thing you stepped away from. And a couple of times like, the reason I left X is because that was not PC, what they are trying to serve me on this platform. But it's still on my phone. It looks like I've been looking at this stuff actively when I'm actually running away from the platform. So I had to make a conscious effort to get rid of that stuff, especially if kids pick up my phone or whatnot as well. But X is an awful place for that sort of stuff now. So I rarely go there. Well, I basically make a conscious effort. Is whenever I get served stuff that I think's just ridiculous, basically, I don't know what the right term is, bad content that I don't want to be served, that is offensive or not PC, I immediately go off the platform to try and maybe like let the algorithms know that I'm not interested in that sort of stuff. But so far, it just keeps coming more and more. So let's see what happens with X in the future. But it is not a nice place to just sift and troll through, which maybe is a good thing for us to keep our social media usage down.
I mean, honestly, Nick, it is incredible because I think I've mentioned this before. Like I've got multiple X accounts. One of them is just for fantasy football, and basically anything that isn't fantasy football or fantasy, it's just an automatic block. And like, I'm just amazed at how many accounts they still serve to me when it's like, clearly anything you serve me that's not related to sports is an instant block. And it's just like, how do these people accounts keep popping up? Like my block list is in the thousands of just, wow. I'm curious to know why X keeps I have theories as to why they keep serving me this stuff, but it's like, I block anything that isn't sports related, yet it keeps like trying to pop up into my feed, and I'm just like, it's a weird place right now.
You need to ask, what's the X's AI tool? Grok. Yeah. Ask it. It should be able to give you all the answers to that. I see everyone asking that now.
Yeah, it's a bit lazy. Well, I've got another story I'll tell on Friday about how AI is not stealing our jobs, but I'll save that for another one because we need to jump into bits. But Nick, we've not spoken in a couple of weeks. We've both been on our respective holidays off to the countryside in our countries that we live in. Getting away for a little bit, but we're back in content never sleeps. we're going to talk about some of your LinkedIn posts you put that were hot fire. People, they might not know, but internally at Sports Pro, we say content never sleeps. And you were continuing to serve people some really hot content while you were away, Nick. And we'll touch on that a little bit more. But there was some breaking news that took place while we were away, Nick, and we're going to go and cover some of that. And I think probably the biggest one from a scale perspective is actually one that actually just broke a couple of days ago, so more recent than the others, is that NFL and the ESPN are finalizing sort of a landmark deal with. We've known the NFL has been looking to try to offload or offset its NFL media side of the business, and it looks like that's now going to be a part of a deal with ESPN, where ESPN is going to acquire some of the products that exist within that from NFL Network. The NFL is going to get a piece of equity within ESPN, if I've read that correctly, which I find really interesting. There's different angles to take on this particular story, just given what we've heard about the NFL trying to offload this, what we know ESPN is trying to do by moving to a more streaming-based service. Lots of different moving parts on this, but ultimately, the NFL, we can argue by which statistic you want to do it on or global appeal, arguably the biggest sports league in the world, ESPN, arguably the biggest sports network in the world, and these two now coming together. So, I mean, maybe what were some of your first initial thoughts, Nick, before we start picking this apart?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, for me, the initial reaction, I have a general thesis on this, and which is that I'm never a fan of when a broadcaster does an equity deal with a rights owner. I just think that when you start to do that, you just take some of the edge off your competitive market tension for media rights sales. So particularly for the top players that have a legitimate media rights marketplace, which these days is less and less, but particularly for the NFL, the risk when you start to get in bed with any one particular partner means that there might be not a complete stop, but a minimization of interest in working together with the NFL if there's more and more insights to be shared with the respective competitors. So, for example, you think about NBC and all the different channels, but going to bed with ESPN, would that make them 5 or 10% less interested in paying the premiums for media rights if they don't think there's a longer term relationship to build with NFL or the ESPN? ESPN's always going to get the first look at new opportunities as a result of this newfound relationship. So I think it's a risky game to play. That being said, to your point about the scale here, or if there was anyone that you would want to do a deal with of this type of nature, for ESPN, it would be the NFL, and for the NFL, it would be ESPN. So out of any example I can think of, this is the best type of marriage, particularly given the NFL has made it clear they don't want to continue to invest in creating the breadth of content they've been doing and distribution and production of the NFL Network and alike. And they have a really great product in the Red Zone that now becomes a staple of the ESPN ecosystem and the new flagship product that's coming to market. It gives us something really tangible to get excited about and not just be an aggregation of ESPN's rights across ESPN's main channels and ESPN Plus. But now they have a really brand new, exciting, shiny asset to add to the mix. And that's going to be really compelling for them to be able to market to new customers when they launch their flagship product soon. So I think it's a smart move by ESPN. 10% is a lot, if that is true, of the ESPN business, because, and what isn't clear is it says there's a multi-million-dollar agreement, but what we don't see is how much of that's cash, if any, how much of it's just equity. And the devil is absolutely in the detail there.
Well, one of the things I found interesting, and I agree with you, the equity stakes is something that's going to be interesting because I think it's probably more of a long-term impact. But our friends at Transmit, Scott Young had a post saying, looking back at the ESPN business, if you think about what its legacy was, and I'm going to age myself here, thinking about what it was like when I was 10, 15 years old, it was waking up in the morning to watch SportsCenter, and then it was in the evenings to watch live sports. And for so long, that was sort of the bread and butter of the business. You had so many great people within the ESPN space in terms of the different hosts they had on SportsCenter. Whereas now it feels like to some degree ESPN's gone a bit away from that. And I remember when First Take first came out, Stephen A. Smith and Skip Bayless, that was great. But now it feels like a lot of sports, not just ESPN itself in America, these just hot takes, get people riled up. It feels less and less from what that traditional ESPN model was. And the point Scott was making is you're actually seeing more of these people go and set up their own media businesses with this idea that ESPN has lost its way a little bit And this is almost a move to try to bring back some of what ESPN originally was, which is focusing on live sports and some of the news stories that were around it, such as a sports center. It feels like ESPN's gone away from that. And this is almost a play to try to pull something back in, because his argument was, you look at some of these people, they end up leaving an ESPN or leaving a Fox Sports and end up actually being able to do something bigger with their own media platforms, because you have things like YouTube now that, or, all the Spotify podcasts allow people to do this. I thought he had kind of an interesting point of, this is a play by ESPN to almost try to go back to its original home, 20 years ago, which I thought was a fairly interesting take when I think about sort of what I remember ESPN as versus kind of where it's gotten to today.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting take on it. Obviously, with the deal, they get a number of additional regular season games as well as part of the deal. ESPN, I think there has been, if you followed ESPN's journey, whenever I go to the US, obviously ESPN is a staple for me to tune into. And what has struck me watching it is they just have these back-to-back talk shows for hours and hours on end, and they lose me a bit. They just doesn't give me the same feel as I used to get from going and watching ESPN. Now, look, I'm sample size of one. You're a sample size of another one, and they've got obviously the data to prove what works and what doesn't. My theory is that there's a couple parts to it. That personality-led content is really valuable for ESPN for a few reasons. One, we've seen that athlete and personality-based media businesses, creators, are on the rise. So if you can back the right creators, the right talent and personalities, it can be a win-win for all sides. Big audience growth on their channels, big audience growth for you, because people want to hear what Stephen A. Smith has got to say on a topic. And that's genuinely a reason why people are tuning in to the platform to some extent. There's a portion of audience. It's also the repurpose value. So a lot of those shows are great to repurpose into podcast, into YouTube clips, and then into bite-sized chunks, because it's a bite-sized fest of comments and hot takes, as you sort of pointed to. So there's a lot of repurposing value. And then the final bit is that creating that sort of content outside of the cost of the talent themselves isn't actually really expensive to do versus producing a live match or other live content. So an hour of producing a talk show with two talking heads that going at each other or plus will only be a fraction of the cost of filling that programming slot that it would be for other live matches they could potentially put into the mix. So I think there's a few factors in why this type of content has been living on. Whether ESPN's going to shift away from that, I doubt it, given it seems like there's more momentum behind that personality-led approach. But they seem to be recycling through stuff quicker, like a show's dying off or talent's leaving as quickly as they can. And that is a cost-saving thing, because some of the talent costs in the US it is unbelievable. And I think maybe you'll see more of a fundamental reset on the market there. And maybe that's where ESPN goes, actually, we're going to let's stop building up these talent, these people, these personalities. Because the reason Stephen A has a platform, the reason a bunch of the talent they have on their books have grown to the stars they have that attract these audiences and are paid really well, is because they're working with ESPN. They have got a ready-made audience base in front of them to build these audiences. Heck, if you and I were given a slot on ESPN, I reckon we'd get a pretty good audience chunk by default, because ESPN is always on a lot of people's TVs, right? So I'm not saying they're not talented, whatever, but what I'm saying is this, because they have that gravitas that ESPN does, that power, that draw, that talent is benefiting off of that. So I think there's a bit of a win-win there. And if they move on to bigger things, I'm not sure it's a big deal for ESPN if they're not having to pay out those contracts. It just means they bring up the next star. They're normally rotating in the background, different talent in get different types of roles, right? Like Richard Jefferson's an example, who's now was appearing on a variety of talk shows and bits and pieces here and there, building up his expertise, building up his brand, building up the trust of the audience. And now he's a play-by-play caller for games right across the NBA season. And I think they'll just keep doing that to keep their costs under keep on top
budget
of their costs, basically. They keep on top of their costs and not have to start paying extortion fees to the people that are not moving the needle as much as they perhaps think they are.
Well, one I will be interested in, speaking of a very specific case study within this and in personality, is I swear, Nick, if they get rid of Scott Hansen on NFL Red Zone, we riot. Like, I mean, he's just synonymous with the product. And I'll be honest with you, like, you talk about talent,
He's
like
amazing.
when they go to the Octo Box, like, I actually don't know how many people could just alternate between 8 games going on at one time. And like,
I wonder there, Chris, if they have someone like training in the wings, because he's got to be sick someday, right? Like
yeah,
he could be off for, does. I did hear him say something about he just basically doesn't go to the toilet for like 12 hours or something.
yeah,
Like ridiculous.
yeah,
He's trained his body to like, well, once he's in game mode,
yeah.
he rides the whole way through and never leaves his position. There must be someone training in the background somewhere for that, but
I mean,
you
it's
would
a great
have to
point.
be like, I imagine like sitting in some dark room pretending they're live on ESPN,
Yeah.
live on the Red Zone, sorry, but actually there's an audience of one, which is like one of the producers just,
Yeah.
no, you need to do this better, champ, whatever your name
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
I don't know. It has to be someone in the wing somewhere. They must have a backstop or provision for that.
Yeah, there must be. You know what, Nick? I know I kind of slagged off AI, that I would slag them off on Friday. I'd be okay if they trained a AI Scott Hansen so that he just lives on forever.
You never know. Look, give us a few years of AI, and could AI do that job to some extent? I think it could absolutely do that. I mean, we're seeing
Right.
AI commentary become more and more of a thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I reckon it could. But yeah, Nick, again, this is a story that we've followed for some time in terms of, the NFL with the media rights, and we knew ESPN was going to try to build that out. So is there something else you want to add on that? I see you trumping.
I would just say that I'm really fascinated to see how integrated the products become and how standalone NFL Network stays. Because the NFL Network itself still has quite a lot of visibility in a lot of different places. And now with the ESPN flagship product launching, will you see the NFL Network actually just be wrapped fully as part of the ESPN ecosystem, a bit like one of ESPN's channels? Or will it have its own journey, its own distribution strategy, and will it keep living on like that? Or will ESPN lean into that further and at some stage maybe actively want to broadcast premium live matches in the NFL Network because of the brand association, etc.? I doubt it, but it would just be interesting to see how integrate, how much of a pivot in approach they take with the NFL's assets that they're now about to acquire.
Well, interesting you say that, because within the story, it's almost included as a throwaway line, but I know it won't be, because I know it'll be very intentionally negotiated. But it also says that ESPN has acquired the ability to integrate betting into the coverage that takes place within those things. So obviously we've talked about betting, what it means in the US, ESPN doing different things around there. But the fact that was very intentionally included, lets you know that there are, to your point, how much integration is there going to be between the two products? Like, they very clearly do have an idea of what they want that to be.
Yeah, I'm still curious to see what ESPN does, because quite frankly, from everything I've seen, everything I've heard, the ESPN Bet project is not working. I watched ESPN on TV, or was watching it on TV, and they would integrate ESPN Bet into the conversations, into the talk shows, and basically like in I'm not sure the different names of the shows I can get on, but NBA on ESPN or something, I think it's the show they had, and they would look at the different bets and really focus in on talking about the odds. The problem comes back to, why would someone go to ESPN Bet when they can have just as good or better experience with their incumbent platform in like DraftKings or FanDuel and the like? That's the problem they still have yet to overcome. So the fact that there's an integration there is intriguing to see if they just, what do you call it, like organic, just, some betting prices on the side of the screen or what have you, or whether they really integrate it some way.
Yeah.
Like, I'd love to see them go, right, if you want to watch the next play, you have to make a bet. That would really force some inertia happening in the market.
Yeah.
But I think that might be a little bit step too far.
Maybe. Well, speaking about another, broadcaster streamer who's tried to take off in the betting space with mixed reviews, is DAZN. We're not going to talk about DAZN and some of its betting, but another story, very interesting, at least in my opinion, interesting, is they've now acquired the international rights for NHL TV on an international scale. So again, to me, this seems very similar to what they did by acquiring the NFL Game Pass, the NFL's international package, one of the few sports packages that I pay for. And I think it's interesting, Nick, in the sense of it actually does kind of follow the model of what DAZN has seemingly done, which is very rarely does it acquire premium rights and premium markets, instead going after maybe tier 2 rights or tier 3 rights in premium markets. And I know you're in Scandinavia. I know they love ice hockey up there. So like it might not be as true for you as it is in the UK, but acquiring another set of major rights, it's not on par with the NFL, but it's, one of the America's big 5 leagues, to be able to have the international rights to that. And I think now we've seen how they've integrated NFL Game Pass into DAZN. I imagine they're probably going to have a similar plug and play model with how they'll put NHL TV into the app, but they've gone about acquiring another set of significant rights, and they're continuing to build out this wider portfolio within the platform.
Yeah, I think it's the deal they needed to do. After the NFL, they've had a couple of other deals that have come to market. They're not needle movers. They're not name brands to really stamp their flag in the ground and like, hey, we are going to be serious about becoming the aggregator of OTT-based platforms in the market. The NFL deal was the needle mover. They paid an extortionate amount of money for that commitment versus what I heard was being offered by their incumbents to get that. But it was very much we're putting our flag down that this is our intent and we need a flagship partner to kick this off and to make other people take note. So they were willing to take that investment and pay a little bit over the odds for that commitment. They will tell you, and the data that they're sharing is that they've now got pretty good momentum on subscriptions. I think it was about 30% or 24% went up year on year. Hard to determine hard to know how good that is for a few different reasons. Yeah. Firstly, what was it the year before that? Yeah. How much did they lose in the transition? We've not had any feedback on those numbers. And what do they need to be? What's their run rate need to be to basically justify the cost that they've made, because they made such a huge commitment through a minimum guarantee for those rights. But they are growing audiences. And if they want to make this commitment to this aggregated play, which I like the concept of, I think it's quite innovative. I think it makes a lot of sense if they get a good critical mass of these platforms. And because the NFL is so synonymous with US sports as well, and fans like us and others who follow US sports will have some interest in consuming other US sports, if for the right price and whatnot, that they needed to get another US sports property and sports league on the books to this level, to this global exclusive deal. And I think the NHL was the most natural partner in this instance. So I think it makes a lot of sense. I think they needed to do this deal. I think that if they didn't get this deal, they'd be lost in between, like, we're all in on this approach, we are this new destination, and kind of like, well, there's a little bit on the side here along everything else. Like, what were the other partners? They had Rally TV. Okay. Rally is a good sport, but it's targeting a specific audience that is willing to pay the premiums there. Courtside 1891, the FIBA-led project, certainly not the NBA in terms of premium nature. The National League football.
Yep. I was going to say, don't forget about the European League of Football for all us American football fanatics. I know.
Of course. And it really, that was a key deal to get in place. But they've got some, second tier, whatever tier you want to put them on. Right. So they needed that another marquee brand on there. Now, the NHL isn't a massive subscription driver, but in certain markets, to your point, like Scandinavia, it could have real cut through. Sweden, Scandinavia is, Sweden in particular, Finland, really big on ice hockey. It's the number one. It's basically the number one sport. Football and ice hockey go hand in hand here. And there's a load of Swedish players in the National Hockey League. Now, there are games available. I don't know the specifics on the rights, but I don't believe they're available to the extent where if my favorite hometown player who's now playing in the NHL, can I just watch him on a heartbeat and follow that particular team? I don't think accessibility is there. So I think it could have a real cut through in those markets. I still am a bit concerned with sports, the sports industry generally, and in particular these relationships, is how marketing is done. So how do they get people to subscribe to NHL TV on the DAZN platform when DAZN is still largely unknown in so many of these markets, particularly probably where the NHL is strong in, or ice hockey is strong. And that is a bit of like, okay, I'd love to see how much conversation has already happened on NHL. We need you to do X to push DAZN on our channels, and DAZN needs to do Y to get NHL visible and how much cross collaboration there is, plus using external channels, paid marketing to really commit to growing these audiences, because it is a huge opportunity. But we've seen it so many times. You can't just build it and hope they will come, right? You have to make the effort to create awareness. And they have the problem that DAZN is still relatively unknown in a load of markets, even after having things like the Club World Cup, where none of the Scandinavian teams, for example, played in. So there's a lot of work still to be done, that's for sure. But they needed to do this deal.
Yeah, I mean, I know people in the UK that subscribe to NFL Game Pass that still can't pronounce DAZN correctly. So like they're on the platform every week and still can't pronounce. But I'm actually going to open up a different can of worms with DAZN, Nick, which I believe I saw rumored with some of their boxing to move away from the pay-per-view model and to move more to a subscription-based model. And one of the things I always think as they're going through this conversation is I subscribe to NFL Game Pass. I don't subscribe to anything else via DAZN. At what point do they potentially offer I'll say a la carte monthly pass? Because at the moment, I'm not going to go from NFL Game Pass to NHL TV. But if instead of paying £180 round fee, you say, hey, we'll charge you 15 quid a month, 20 quid a month, you get access to everything, the boxing, the NHL. You think that ever happens, Nick? Is there a reason to do that?
I think there is definitely a reason to that. I think that is basically, it's a kind of reinvention of the cable approach. And to some extent, you're paying one fee to get access to all those things. I think there's a lot of studies around this. I certainly believe in this, that sometimes when you package up too much into one offer, you actually just dilute the value, the perception of the value in the eyes of the customer. So what I mean by that is, I've used this example with other people on F1, but I'll use it in this case. Is like, if I'm a massive NFL fan, I just live and breathe, it's in my veins. I don't care what the prices are, I'll basically buy it. If it starts to get wrapped into a bigger product or project or offering, and you haven't been a subscriber before, your perception of what the value is can be difficult to quantify. But if you've been a subscriber for a long time, it's a bit different. You know what you've been paying, you kind of know what the market is. So if it's an anecdotal 10, 20% more, you're like, you know what? I probably will. Yeah. Why not? That's not a big stretch. But if you've never paid it before, to get a new customer, I think sometimes like, that means I'm still paying for all this other content that I don't want. You've got to educate them into understanding that it's a really great deal and not to sound like you're marketing at them too hard. So it's just a really tricky balance, particularly for new customers, I think, to get their heads around when you start bundling stuff together. But I completely agree. That is a great next step. The tricky part comes down to actually the construct of those deals. So let's say the framework, I'm going to speculate on some of the deals. There's a minimum guarantee in place with someone like the NFL. Okay, then once they hit certain thresholds, then there might be a revenue share component on subscriptions over a certain number. Now, if you start bundling those things together, it becomes really tricky to dice up and splice and dice those. Again, you're looking at how the cable approach was basically done, where people are forced to pay, or there's an allocation going to each channel depending on what sub deals are kind of being struck if you're looking to a bundle style approach, and that can be where it gets complicated. But that's something that can be worked out as well. So there's different models and approaches that can be done. You can look to different streaming platforms about consumption to work that out. But it's a tricky one to navigate if they do play that out. On the boxing front, they do already offer it, I believe, in the US, a subscription offering for their fight sports. So the fact they've come out and now said that the boxing that they run, that I think is backed by Saudi Arabia or the Riyadh seasons, that series will now be included in a subscription product. And I think the guy said, was quoted, who was like the representative for the ministry or whoever was working for the Saudis there, was like, pay-per-view basically killed the sport or killing the sport or something to that nature. So I don't think don't have probably much of a choice there, but I think the net benefit is they hopefully have a more sustainable business model as a result of that, and one less reason why piracy can be as powerful as it is when you're not asking for a $100 one-off hit. It's a much more marginal price tag attached to it. So yeah, interesting one to follow for many reasons, as DAZN always is.
Well, if I see in 2026 they offer a bundled monthly subscription, I'm going to claim credit.
What was interesting, very quickly, on the Club World Cup, the tactic they tried, I'm going to mention it, is that every time I logged on to the Club World Cup platform, I immediately got an email pushing me to subscribe every single time. It was like a push notification on email. I thought that was a very interesting tactic to think that would push me into a subscription.
Yeah.
I don't think it's quite the right approach that I would support, but I mean, try what you can. You got to try whatever you can to get someone to subscribe these days.
Yeah, maybe like a post Club World Cup Spotify wrap. You've watched more minutes than anybody else of the Club World Cup, or hey, we saw you really like Chelsea. That maybe that approach would have. I don't even know if it's feasible. I don't know if it would have worked, but yeah, I don't know if push notifications the second I log on is exactly going to do it. But whatever, we'll see how things go for the DAZN. Moving on to the next story is one with the WSL here in the UK, where they are now going to have a new Sunday noon 12 p.m. kickoff slot on Sky Sports. This will be new for them. They've had the late night, I say late night, but late Sunday kickoff on Sky Sports. They've got some other coverage deals across their media sale side. But this is new. This is new and exciting. Having that noon slot, Nick. I always refer back to the conversation I had with Melissa Lawton at Sale GP, where she talked about when it comes to programming, if you're not the tier one, what you need to be thinking about is who you're around, who's immediately before you, who's immediately after you. And I think I'd seen some studies. They'd seen an uptick in viewership for the late kickoff on Sunday, immediately following the Premier League 4:30 p.m. kickoff. I feel like there could be a similar effect that, if there is a big game at 2 o'clock, 2:30, being immediately in front of it. And I know that won't be the only reason, but I always think back to that conversation Melissa Lawton said, where when it comes to programming, if you're not the big ticket, make sure you're next to the big ticket on one side or the other.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a good piece of advice. And look, I do think there's still an element of artistry and science that goes into programming for any of these types of platforms, or if you're the rights owner trying to negotiate what you can get out of it. I would say that it hasn't been all roses for the WSL since they really committed to Sky and BBC. And I think some of the numbers that came out earlier this year were showing that there was actually a flattening or perhaps even decrease in overall ratings for the league over the past season. So I feel that this decision has been done for a couple of reasons. Decision one, firstly, I would say that you're right about your point about the programming side. Is I remember hearing Sky themselves talk about the fact that, actually, I was talking to someone who'd done some research on it, actually. And the difference, I think it was actually, what was his name? It'll come to me. He shared some data and insight. Phelan. That's it. I think Phelan's his name. It was I think he's ex-Nielsen. He's now gone to...
I know. I can see his face on LinkedIn right now. I know who you're talking about.
Gosh, sorry, Phelan. I've completely mind blank, but I've been on holiday, so forgive me. But the data I think he shared with me or showed me was basically something to do with like the difference in audience when it was feeding off immediately off the Premier League, so it was immediately after, was significantly stronger when it was completely standalone. That was basically the premise that I think I saw. Which doesn't surprise greatly, but with the numbers dipping, maybe they decided that was no longer the right approach for those rights, and they had to find a different time slot for it. Now, there's two other things to consider with the WSL. Now, the WSL's position and identity is still currently very focused on attracting family audiences, both to games live. And I'd say watching the live experience. So having a game earlier in the day rather than later in the day just works much better for families for those reasons. So therefore, that works better to watch it live in person, and for Sky to then be able to market those and actually be a funnel and perhaps secure some later audiences towards the end of the WSL matches, which actually is where the real activity is happening, right? Yeah. That's when the games are being decided. At the beginning, just before, people might be focusing on the EPL, although the EPL is in a blackout. So that's another problem altogether. But they might be watching it in other ways. So that was one thing, and the other thing was I have completely mind blanked on what I was going to say. So
Well, while you're thinking about that,
Yeah.
it's Phelan Hill.
That's it. I thought it was Hill, but I didn't want to get his surname wrong. Hi, Phelan. Good. Thank you for your insights as always, and hope you're doing well. I know he's definitely been a listener for some time. Yeah. So anyway, I think WSL maybe made that shift to try to feed, to really double down on that identity, and allow Sky also to create a bit more around it to see if they can leverage more of that live asset, because they aren't paying a lot for it in comparison to the EPL, and they didn't really have much else to put in that earlier slot. So I think it's a bit of a no-brainer for everyone involved to shift those times. The question is, will it have any meaningful impact in ratings, in fandom, etc.? I think it's definitely a better slot to have than to not, but time will tell.
Yeah. Well, the other interesting tidbit out of this, and it opens lots of different doors in the way you take the conversation, but for those that don't know, you can't actually purchase beer at a football match in the UK. You can purchase beer before the game. You can purchase beer at halftime, but you can't purchase it during the game. And if you do have a beer, you are not allowed to leave the concourse. So say you bought a beer just before kickoff, you can't actually enter the proper part of the seating while you have a beer. And they're going to trial having beer at WSL games as a way to drive attendance. And then there's also the side note that we talked about the Club World Cup, for example, where when you don't have people in the stands, it just makes for not as good viewing experience. Remember what it was like watching empty stadiums during COVID. They're hoping there's the knock-on effect. If there's more people in stands, it makes for a better product. But as an American, I've always found it a bit awkward, but I can understand if there's a history and people can't control themselves, is what it is. But it's just an interesting little tidbit of something else that's going to be taking place the next season.
Oh gosh, I remember the first time I came to a match and I found that out. I'm moving to the UK 15, 16 years ago. I'm like, you can't take a beer to sit down in the stands. Like, what the problem? Then it's obviously to do with a legacy of hooliganism and other stuff going on. But it blew me away. I remember being in a corporate box actually, and you can't take it out from the corporate box, obviously, at one of these. It was a Premier League game, and you had to have the curtains drawn as well. So no one could see you even drinking in the boxes, because they would create an animosity towards those in the boxes if they were able to drink and watch the game from their little cubby hole in the stadium. I thought it's a crazy situation if that's where it's got to. And so then to see this and the WSL take a different approach is really interesting. Also because of the thing I said before about them being focused quite on like targeting families and younger audiences. Because I don't think alcohol's really targeted at that group in the same way that I would say and speculate that fandom in football, particularly traditional fans, that you would, if you asked an AI tool, paint me what a traditional football fan looks like.
We're gonna do that. Maybe that'll be the thumbnail for this week's YouTube episode.
Yes. Let's do that. But that would paint a very different picture. So, and they would be much more interested in buying alcohol if they could. I think the problem is with any of these instances, if they do it, you get instant pushback for the Premier League saying, hey, we want to have this reinstated. I think in Australia, they often serve mid-strength and low-strength beer, but they still served it. I think, if you're serving beer at 2% alcohol, it's a bit different to serving it at 6%, which is over here. Caught me out a couple of times at the pub. But anyway, I wonder if it's going to make any difference at all to attendance, significant enough revenue. At least they can start doing porridge rights deals of significance at stadiums if they start opening up those floodgates. So there will be a new revenue driver for clubs if they can make this come to life. But is the Premier League ready to make that move? I think if they unlock the 3 p.m. blackout, maybe they might have to.
Yeah. Like I said, it's an interesting tidbit. I think to your point, the people going to those games, it's not that they won't have a beer, but they probably aren't drinking beers the way. So for people that don't know, I'm a West Ham fan. I go to about 8-10 games a year. One of my good friends is a season ticket holder, and he's right down there at the Hooligans. We sit right next to the away fans. Yeah, they drink. It's not just beer, but yeah, I imagine they're not the crowd they're necessarily going to WSL games.
Well, the other tidbit, and I haven't been to any games, any football matches in Europe, actually, come to think of it. So that must be a goal of mine. Our next goal is to go to a game, at least in Sweden, to see what the atmosphere is like. But one of the things I think catches a lot of people out, particularly from Australia, from the US, is people arrive as the game is starting to the venue. They come literally on the clock because they want to be at the pub, basically, for the very last minute to drink their pints or whatever, most likely. And that pub culture that exists before a game, they go to the game, and then quite often at the start of the second half, there's a lot of people missing because they're finishing their beers or still lined up in a queue to get their beer. So I think it's just an interesting tidbit for those that aren't used to those sorts of cultures, that if they like a drink at a football match or a sporting match, that it's way more complicated than you think. Now, rugby, different ball game, but it is just football in the UK that has these rules. I have no idea if it exists in other countries across Europe.
Yeah, I don't think it does. I think you can drink in European countries. Maybe I'm wrong. Someone will correct me if I'm wrong. But one sports league, Nick, or one football league I know you can drink in is the MLS, because I have been to a couple matches there, since EFC, and I know you can drink while you're there. And we got some numbers on viewership of the NLS season pass on Apple TV. I know that is something we've talked about because that was kind of, not a massive deal for Apple, but it was them dipping their toe to an extent that they haven't done before. And Don Garber from the MLS kind of gave us a little bit of a peek, saying, they're averaging about 120,000 unique viewers per match, which they've said is marking a 50% increase compared to the previous season. So Nick, we've sort of asked the question as to, how much viewership was, whether or not it was justifying Apple's investment. Because I believe there were some clauses in there that Apple could break from it early if they wanted to, and just sort of how the product was going overall. And we had concerns whether it's just the messy effect will continue long term. We were very interested in this deal because if Apple all of a sudden decided to, pull the plug and go all in, that'd be very exciting for people. But this seems like the first time we've maybe gotten some hard, fast numbers as opposed to just we're happy with where we're at kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I took a while to process these numbers. 120,000 on average is a really good number, I think, for what they've achieved, for how gated the access was. But then I looked at it a little bit further, and here's where my skepticism comes out about how really good those numbers are. Now, firstly, they have also shared numbers before that. I think it was an Inter Miami game, where they had north of 1 million viewers watching that particular game. They don't have 1 million subscribers, I can tell you that. There's no way they have north of 1 million subscribers. And then if you look at the specificity of how people can watch on Apple TV for MLS, it isn't just through the MLS Season Pass. We know that they've done some deals with different linear broadcasters across the world and with regional markets and with Fox.
One Football.
Well, football, but particularly, One Football is actually a highlights deal, I think.
Oh, yeah.
But the numbers that Don Garber did share were explicitly about Apple TV, and that's why they felt like the best number we could possibly feed off of today. But it's worth noting that Sunday night soccer matches, so the prime time games every Sunday evening, they are available free to all Apple TV Plus subscribers, not MLS Season Plus. Not just to I can't speak. Not just to MLS Season Pass holders, which was the concern. They also have certain games, preseason matches, League Cup, and also a handful of early season matches and preseason matches available for free on Apple TV at the start of the season, in the hope they are able to attract audiences to subscribe to the platform. So when you start digesting that, okay, firstly, there's going to be some games that really skew audiences and skew numbers. And then they've actually got access for free to people to access. That's not a bad number, but then it doesn't paint it's not necessarily as good as it sounds, because actually not all those people are subscribing to the MLS Season Pass. A lot of that's probably coming through. There's probably good chunks of audiences there that are just coming for free for Apple TV. And that might be enough for Apple TV, though, for Apple's point of view, that they're getting consumption on their platform. Time is money. Engagement drives down churn issues, increases retention, and that is a win. But just I think it's important for the marketplace to understand that those numbers, when they see them, aren't just within the season pass offering that Apple TV are offering to people who want to subscribe to the platform. So yeah, I'm tempering my excitement. They did say also that stat that it's a 50% increase year on year, which is pretty significant growth, I think, for whatever way you look at it.
Yeah.
However, then if you factor in those Sunday night games, maybe they had a few more of the big marquee matchups on that time slot, all of a sudden, actually, is it as big as it sounds, or is it just because they've put better games on? So it's still cloudy. Dalton Garber's even come out and said that we need to all come up with a unified measure of performance on streaming, because at the moment, everyone's sending out tidbits of information that tells the story they want, and there's not just a universal measure of success. But who's going to make the first move there? I don't think it's definitely not going to be Apple. That is for sure.
Yeah, no, I mean, shocking people using data numbers to validate their points, Nick. I've never done that in a sports debate or argument about why LeBron is better than MJ or anything vice versa. Yeah, I mean, the MLS season pass, I do like some of the things they've done with it, Nick, in terms of like they do have the roundup show. It's not quite the same as Red Zone because there's not many goals going on at the same time, but I think it's nice. And then the other thing that I thought was really interesting when we look back at it is when Apple took over was they now have a set schedule, because I don't know if you remember what they said before the Apple deal. They had something like 38 different unique kickoff times, whereas now like it's like we only kick off at 7 p.m. during the week. We only kick off at this time there. Like I think they've done some things. I do think, the Messi effect is real. I'll be curious to see, because he can't have more than about a year left, what ends up happening from there. So I still think there's some to be seen what happens long term with that, and whether or not there's a bump with the World Cup in 2026. That might be hopeful thinking, but it'll be interesting to see what ends up happening there.
Yeah, completely. I'm interested to see whether this continued investment into stars keeps happening or not. I think that's going to be an interesting part of the proposition. I know that there's Tottenham's captain Son is probably moving to the MLS as well. Is it to?
It's official now. It's LAFC.
LAFC. I mean, that's a really good get. Although he ain't young, it's not like he's getting him in his super prime, but he's still a world class player clearly. So just if they are able to, I guess, continue to get a little bit younger and get more players in their prime, or is it going to be still they're going to get players that are looking for something change, that have cashed in and will have a different experience? The World Cup is coming. They're hoping that's going to be a big needle mover for audiences. How the MLS maximizes that opportunity, I'm not sure how that other than just inertia around soccer as a competition or as a sport, that might be one part of it. But I feel like they need something else. And who we all know Messi's not going to be playing there forever.
Yeah. Well, not to get to none of the guys on the U.S. men's national team currently play in the MLS, so you can't even
really.
Let's put it this way: if there are, it's the vast minority. So like you can't even sell it as, "Hey, World Cup's coming up. Watch these guys in the follow-up," or "Hey, look at these guys and how they've done since." So yeah, we'll see how it goes, Nick. But I just want to say, everybody, thank you once again for tuning in for this episode of Stream Time Sports, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Thanks, everyone.